Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you for listening. I hope this show is something that you'll look forward to checking in with every week. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, Gardening Utah aims to inspire you and keep you in the know of what tasks you should be accomplishing in your yard and meet amazing, informative experts along the way. This show airs on the radio on the weekends here in Utah at 10 a.m. on 860 AM KKAT, and episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. On today's show, we are going to talk cover crops. We're going to be giving you the what, the where, why, and how with Parker Garlitz from TrueLeafMarket.com. Now, you've heard them on the show before. On episode 40, we had Parker on the show talking seeds. And, you know, if you haven't heard of True Leaf Market, I bet you've heard of Mountain Valley Seeds. Well, it's the same company. True Leaf Market is the website that sells Mountain Valley seeds, and they're all one big happy family. And so we're going to be talking with Parker today about cover crops. And it's something I personally have never done, but let me tell you, I am so excited to start mine. You'll be able to hear my excitement as Parker gets talking about the benefits of cover crops. And, you know, forgive me, it's just nothing I've ever taken the time to do before, but I'm telling you what, I cannot wait to get started. This episode is really inspiring, and it really gets you thinking about one of my favorite things, which is soil. It really gets you thinking about soil health and the science behind it, and why it is that we need to, in some circumstances, go back to the way that it used to be done. Anyway, really inspiring episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. But first, you know what time it is. The tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is right now, and I really mean right now, is the time to get out there and control that field bindweed. Now, what am I talking about? A lot of people unfortunately call it morning glory. And you know what? Morning glory technically is quite a beautiful, lovely, well-behaved annual. But unfortunately, we sometimes in Utah tend to call it morning glory as far as field bindweed, which is kind of a smaller leafed and, that white flower that's all over the place. Well, this is your time to get out there and really chase after this plant. It is the perfect time of year. And I'm actually going to read a quote directly from the USU Extension Salt Lake County, and I shared this on the Gardening Utah Facebook page. But they basically say, morning glory haters, this is your time. This is your opportunity to knock this awful weed back and to strike a blow for your desirable plants. And they go on to say that when fall temperatures are around 40 degrees at night, bindweed starts sending resources to its roots in preparation for winter. And that means any herbicide added at this point will also go to its roots and have a much better chance of killing the nuisance. So get out there. Any method you use for bindweed control will be more effective right now. Anyway, I was inspired by that. Love it. It's a great reminder to get out there. I have plenty of little patches all around my yard, and I'm really careful with what I do. Just so you're aware what I do, I like to use I call it the liter bottle method, where I take like a liter bottle of Sprite or whatever soda, cut off the bottom, and then go to wherever the field bindweed is, wrap it up into there, and then I take the spray end of the glyphosate or Roundup or whatever you're using and stick that straight into the lid of the liter bottle, and it controls the spray so that you're not getting any of that glyphosate on any other desirable plant. And I really love to do that. And you don't have to use a liter bottle. It depends on the size of plant you have. Sometimes the smaller soda plastic bottles will work. Sometimes even gallon jugs of milk. You name it. Any plastic container can work. Just cutting off that bottom and getting that bindweed rolled up inside the plastic container and spraying the glyphosate down through the lid. That really helps you control that. There's also a lot of methods you can look up online where people will do a very similar thing, but with plastic bags. You're kind of putting the bag around the plant and then cutting off a tiny little section at the top and spraying that glyphosate into the bag so that it completely surrounds that glyphosate. If you do that though, you're going to want to put something over it that will protect it from the sun, because you don't want the sun to damage the plant when it's got that plastic around it. You're really going to want that plant to stay alive, as weird as it sounds, so that it will continually soak up that glyphosate and send it all the way down into that root system, which is what we're really going for, is to kill that root system, was as many of us know, go all the way down to the center of the earth. And that was a big exaggeration, but you know what I mean. So again, this is a plant that is probably the number one FAQ for any of us that are in garden Facebook groups or that, run a show like myself. Number one question I get: what do I do about field bindweed? Well, here's your warning. Get out there, and whatever method you look up online is going to be more impactful now, because again, the plant is going into dormancy. It's starting to focus on the roots. So let's get those leaves covered in some Roundup, glyphosate, whatever you want to use. Some people swear by vinegar. I don't necessarily suggest that, but yeah, get out there, do something about it, because those roots, it's now or never.
And that's your Gardening Utah Tip of the Week, brought to you by The Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit utahadvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Coupon code alert. So we're going to be back with trueleafmarket.com, but we have a coupon code from them just for you. It is JF Cover Crop 10. So that's JF Cover Crop 10. I'll put in the episode notes. And what that will give you is 10% off any seed that you need on trueleafmarket.com for your cover crops. And Parker's going to go through the different types of seeds, whether you need a blend or whether you kind of want to look for something more like a clover. No matter what it is you want, you can use that code to get 10% off whatever cover crop seed you need. So that's pretty cool. And there are other promo codes in the episode notes as well. Don't ever sleep on those episode notes, because there's always good deals and a recap of the episodes and links to maybe specific plants that we talk about. So definitely check those out. And can we just talk about the fact that it's fall? I love the fall. I absolutely love it, but I'm not loving this nighttime temp drops, the extreme difference that we're having, late October-like temperatures in September, because it's really making me go to a lot of extra effort having to cover my tomato plants and pepper plants. I know a lot of us are just giving up, but I just cannot do it. I planted a little bit late this year, so I still have yet to get some of my bumper crops from different varieties of tomatoes that I planted. So I've been kind of obsessive about covering, and I need to where I'm at. I'm usually about 10 to 15 degrees less than what the forecast says, because I'm right by the river, and that creates all kinds of different microclimates. But either way, I still love fall, so stay tuned to Gardening Utah. We're going to keep you in the know of all the things you need to do in the garden this year to put it to bed for the winter and get it ready for next spring. And we're going to be back right after this with Parker Garlitz from trueleafmarket.com. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me today is Parker Garlitz from trueleafmarket.com. Parker, thanks for being back on the show.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to be back.
This is so fun. And So for those of you new to Gardening Utah, Parker was also on episode 40, so you can go back and listen to that show as well. We covered lots of amazing things all about seeds. So before we get into it, you were just telling me about a really fun event that I think we should let Utahns know about, the ginormous pumpkin regatta.
Yep, that's you've never seen anything like this one. We kind of co-sponsor this along with Daybreak community and the Utah Giant Pumpkin Growers Association. So it's kind of a three-way collaboration to run this event. And basically what we do is we bring giant pumpkins grown by the Utah Giant Pumpkin Growers Association and carve them out, turn them into boats, and race them on Daybreak Lake. And we do it every year. COVID prevented it from happening last year. But outside of that, it is a fun event. There's thousands of people. There's food trucks. There's booths. There's games. There's all kinds of fun stuff. It's great for the kids. And there will be several different giant pumpkin races, and you'll be able to see giant pumpkins that sometimes get as big as 1,800 and 2,000 pounds. Depends on the year, but
unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So
and so that is what are the dates and times again? And I'll put this in the episode notes for listeners.
Yep, it'll be at Daybreak Lake or the pond in the middle of Daybreak, and it's October the 16th. And the first race starts at 11 a.m., but it will, you can start showing up kind of around 10 o'clock-ish or so. You can watch the pumpkins being carved into boats and having the pumpkin guts removed and all that kind of fun stuff.
Oh, so they do that right there on site?
Right there on site, yep.
Oh, how fun. How fun.
Yep.
So this is a random question. What kind of pumpkin year is it? Like, I know how, certain things go down each year. So what is it like? Do you have any updates?
It's a good question. In my home garden, I didn't make any effort, my wife and I, to grow big pumpkins, but I've got two that probably topped out around 100 pounds. And that was with no cheating, right? No feeding them with milk, no Miracle Grow, just regular water. So I've got some pretty big ones. So I'm hoping it's going to be a big year, and you'll see some really, really big pumpkins there. That
is so fun. Okay, hold on. You said feeding them milk?
Yeah, that's a trick. If you've ever read the Laura Ingalls Wilder series, Little House on the Prairie.
Okay.
Her husband won the giant pumpkin competition back in Minnesota 100 years ago or whatever it was. And he thought he cheated because he was feeding it milk. And they said, no, that's not against the rules. So he was.
Oh, my word.
Worried about that. Yeah. So that's a trick that goes back a long time. And giant pumpkins drink a lot. You got to give them tons and tons and tons of water. Like however much water you think you got to give them, it's a lot more.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Wow. That sounds like such a fun event. The ginormous pumpkin regatta, everyone. So maybe I'll grab the family and go out there too. That sounds like a riot.
Yeah, it's totally free. There's no tickets or anything. Just come out and watch the races. And like I say, there's food trucks and all kinds of activities for the kids. And
how fun. That's so cool. Okay, well, listen, today we are going to be talking cover crops. And you have such an interesting take on this that you mentioned before the show on how, this is a tried and true thing that's happened for so long, and it's just not as much of a thing anymore. So let's get into it.
You bet. Let's kind of key off on that and go back. If you go back to the earliest agriculture in Mesopotamia and Egypt and that kind of thing, those early farmers found out that they could get better production by growing off-season crops. Not so much in Egypt. They had the annual flooding of the River Nile, which gave them spectacular soil quality all the time. But in places where soil gets depleted over time, which in your home garden it does, just like any other place, cover crops is a great strategy for soil replenishment, right? And it doesn't necessarily replace the use of fertilizers. But it can, depending on how serious you are about it. But there are things that cover crops will do for to revitalize your soil that chemical fertilizers can't do. And there's nothing wrong with using both, right? like any of the giant pumpkin growers, there's none of them that aren't using some kind of NPK fertilizer, Miracle Grow or whatever,
Sure.
To juice those pumpkins a little bit. But cover crops are a great way to create really, really healthy soil. And that's probably the first thing we ought to talk about is what is healthy soil? What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
So let me dig into what healthy soil is. So healthy soil, right, has lots of different characteristics, right? What are the ingredients of a healthy garden soil? Well, rock and sand, right? But that's certainly not all. Most soil has decaying organic matter in it. That's really the bedrock of what a healthy soil is. Healthy soil typically has bacteria, beneficial bacteria, and other living things like earthworms. It typically has a good amount of nutrients, like your basic NPK, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, which is what almost all chemical fertilizers are, right? Miracle Grow is just NPK. And it's those three that allow plants to grow big and healthy looking. But I have a personal little theory, and that is that, most farmland in the United States has been farmed for well over 100 years. And NPK has been crucial to having good crop yields. But those plants that are producing our vegetables are pulling from the soil other nutrients as well, sulfur and chromium and vanadium and selenium and copper and other micronutrients that aren't really necessary for a healthy plant. But if they're not present in the soil, they're not being taken up by the plant, and then they're not in your food supply. So in my home garden, I like to fertilize with a trace mineral fertilizer. And we sell a trace mineral fertilizer that's a Utah-based company called Azomite. And that's the A to Z of trace minerals. And it's got all 67 trace minerals necessary for human health in it. And that's a great way to add a little bit of trace minerals to your soil, because nobody fertilizes with that stuff. If you want big, you use NPK. If you want healthy, NPK plus trace minerals, right?
I absolutely love this. My jaw's dropping on the camera right now as we're talking, because if I really think our listeners know I'm obsessed with vegetable gardening, and I have so many things that I grow. And the reason is for those minerals. But this is the first time I've heard of that fertilizer, so I'm going to be getting some. But
it's literally mined out of a mine down in central southern Utah, and it's literally just dirt that happens to be extremely rich in micronutrients, and it's ridiculously inexpensive.
Unbelievable.
And it's a nice little addition. But for me personally, that for me is a component of truly healthy soil, is to have good micronutrients available.
Absolutely.
Right. And then, of course, you've got things like moisture and a good, healthy soil structure and other things. But those are basically the ingredients. And if you've been gardening over time, over several years, you probably notice that soil starts to look a little depleted, and your crop yields may start to deplete a little bit. And that's usually a function of soil health. And so what a cover crop does is a cover crop is designed by nature. And again, going back thousands and thousands of years in human agriculture, as a very natural, super sustainable, unbelievably inexpensive way to revitalize soil. And that's at the end of the day what that's all about. So what a cover crop is then is it's an off-season crop that you grow outside of your traditional gardening season that is designed to do certain things. And we'll get into the detail of that coming up in a little bit, right? To do certain things to revitalize and create healthier soil in your garden. Farmers do it pretty consistently. A lot of times you've heard certainly of the concept of crop rotation. Crop rotation is just a cover crop, right? It's two crops that replenish the soil and go back and forth, right? One maybe deplete, the other one will use what the other one put in, and vice versa, and it goes back and forth. The cover crop is the same basic idea, right?
Okay.
So that's kind of the concept. So what do cover crops do for you? Well, it depends. There are lots of different types of cover crops, and professional growers and professional farmers will go and they'll diagnose their soil and say, hey, I need more nitrogen, or I need to combat nematodes, or I need to cope with soil structure, whatever it is. For home gardeners, we don't really need to overthink it. A good cover crop blend that does all of that is probably the right decision. You don't need to go out and figure out exactly what kind of cover crop I need. Yeah. But depending on the plant that you grow as a cover crop, or the mix of plants that you grow, they can do things for you like add biomass to the soil. That's probably the number one thing, right? Is you want to add more green decaying matter to the soil to give that soil better structure. Especially if you have soil that's like a high clay soil, or very sandy soil, or a very depleted soil that doesn't seem like it has a lot of structure, the biomass aspect of that, and I'll dig a little bit more into that as we go, but adding biomass to the soil, keeping the soil bacteria healthy and active is a function of cover crops. Adding nutrients to the soil, either from the air or from deep down below the layer of topsoil. Some cover crops have deep tap roots, like mustards, for example, and they will actually pull micronutrients up into the topsoil layer, right? So if you're not fertilizing with the trace mineral fertilizer, that's a method of getting deep minerals up to a higher level. Cover crops can attract beneficial insects and pollinators, and they can help control the wrong kinds of insects. In some cases, right? Pests. They improve soil structure and texture. They can prevent erosion. They trap moisture, especially if you use a no-till method and are using the top layer of dead cover crops as a mulch. And we'll talk a little bit about different approaches, a no-till and a till method, right? Okay. Depending on your style of gardening.
Yeah.
They compete for weeds and can help keep weeds down, especially growing in the off season. They can be forage for cattle and other livestock. Some of them are flowering and look amazingly beautiful, especially in the off season. And the best thing is, in terms of bang for your buck, it's just so cheap. It's almost free.
Really?
Literally, you're looking at, depending on how big your garden is, but $8 or $10 will probably cover most backyard home gardens in terms of a thorough cover crop.
Unbelievable.
It's a huge bang for your buck. Makes a lot of sense. And we can dig in and start going through that.
Okay, well, we're going to get right back into more with cover crops with Parker Garlitz from TrueLeafMarket.com right after this. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, having the coolest conversation with Parker Garlitz from TrueLeafMarket.com about cover crops. And Parker, I just got to tell you, our listeners know that I have a portion of my yard still yet to be landscaped, and I am going to do this fall and take all our listeners along on social media, because I am just blown away at this information, and I'm loving it, and I'm really excited to get started.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the next step here?
Well, let's talk about when you sow cover crops, right? Okay. And let's talk specifically about Utah. It's going to vary depending on where in the country you are and what USDA zone you're in. But the bottom line is, for Utah, cover crop season for us really starts here, kind of end of September, early October. That's really the cover crop planting season for fall. And for me, I'm going to harvest my pumpkins here at the end of the month, and they're going to become jack-o'-lanterns. And I cook some Puerto Rican food, which uses pumpkins for a couple of things, but the small ones are better for that.
Yep.
I'm going to harvest those pumpkins. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the dead matter, put it in the compost pile, and then I'm going to plant cover crops. And that will typically happen, right here at the end of September for me. Now, you could do a little earlier depending on when you terminate your garden, right?
Okay.
But what cover crops are typically is they're typically crops like clover, typically winter rye is a component of cover crops like daikon radish. These are cold weather crops that will do very well in the fall. They'll continue to grow until frost. And typically when in Utah, it gets cold enough that it will kill virtually everything in our most popular garden cover crop mix, even the winter rye. Now, if we have a mild winter, the winter rye may not terminate, and you may have to terminate it at the beginning of spring. Mow it down if you till under, right? If you use a till method, that's the safest way to do it. If you use a no-till, there's other approaches, like you can starve it for water, which is tough to do if it's, if there's a lot of snow melt, if there's rain, you can cover it with a tarp and deny it sunlight and kill it. There's a lot of ways to terminate it. But the bottom line is, in Utah, usually a typical winter will winter terminate the crop. And what you've got a crop that will grow from the end of September all the way through to maybe even November, December, depending on the season. And the cool thing about a cover crop, right, is that most people think about a cover crop in terms of what they can see above ground. Cover crops, for the most part, have root structures that are every bit the same volume of biomass as what below ground as what you can see above ground. And in the case of things like daikon radish, and mustards, you actually might have more biomass below ground than you have above ground, which is why a no-till method works, right? Even if you mow that crop down and let it lay on top of your garden as a mulch, you still have a massive benefit of cover crop, because that root structure now becomes biomass. It adds structure to the ground. The next garden crop that you plant uses the channels of the decaying roots as its pathway down. It's a cool concept, right? So when do you do it? You do it again right now, end of September, early October. You let that crop grow; it'll winter terminate. Now, there's another approach too. You can do it in the early spring. So as soon as you've got enough snow melt, and maybe even a couple of patches of snow still in the garden, you can, or in your garden plot, you can go out and seed it in the early spring. Let those if you do yard work in Utah, right? You go out in Valentine's Day and you've already got weeds taking hold, right?
Yep.
So they're starting to sprout and they're growing, and they're a little cold weather tolerant, and they'll grow in that early time, even with some frost dates still to come, and they'll survive them. So you can plant your cover crops also in the early spring, and you'll just want to terminate those probably 2 to 3 weeks before you plant your garden.
Okay.
And that's all there is to it. So you're just taking that kind of non-prime growing season, either in the early spring or in the late fall, and planting your cover crop, and you just seed it fairly heavily, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of seeding rates on our website, for each cover crop mix and each cover crop variety we have, it includes a seeding rate, right? So you can know roughly how much for the size of your garden. So that's when to do it.
Okay.
And how do you plant? Again, it's the seeding rate is on our website, and basically you prep the ground. You remove, the biomass from your above ground biomass from your garden, or if you're a tiller, you till it under, right? You plant the cover crops right on top. If you don't till it, you're putting that in a compost pile or whatever. And I like to not uproot the root system from my garden, right? I like to cut it and leave the root structure down in the ground, because that again is part of the whole idea. And you let that grow, and again, it'll either winter terminate, or you'll terminate it in the spring by mowing it down, or by starving it of water, or you can cover it with a tarp, whatever it is. Depends on how much ground you've got, right? If you've got a really, really big garden, the tarp method's probably not going to work. But there's a lot of folks that will just terminate it with with a kind of a biodegradable herbicide, right? So you can kill the crop with an herbicide and let that herbicide biodegrade, so it doesn't affect your future garden, right? But again, different folks have different opinions about that, right? Like
Yeah.
I'll tell you this story with respect to till it or not till it, right? I sat and asked the question to our two most experienced gardeners at True Leaf, and one is a professional horticulturalist. The other was a gardener who had, just decades and decades and decades of gardening experience. And I watched them argue back and forth, a little more heated than I would have liked, till versus no till. And they had two very different opinions about it. And what it boils down to is it's a stylistic approach. If you're a no-till gardener, cover crops are awesome. If you're a tiller, cover crops are awesome. They'll both work, right? In my particular case, I'm not opposed to tilling. And if the soil is really very depleted, I might till it to add more biomass. But generally speaking, for a reasonably healthy soil structure, you can no-till. So you've got options on that, right? And it's like virtually anything. You ask 10 different gardeners how they tackle something, you get 9 different answers. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
None of them are wrong. They're stylistic, right?
Yeah.
So back to the key issue, herbicide. Some gardeners are cool with it. Others, not so much. So you've got to just look at different methods to terminate. But again, in Utah, our winters get cold enough that typically it will kill even the perennial grasses.
Okay. I cannot wait to get started. I can't wait to see all the sprouts and everything. I'm so excited. Well, we're going to be right back with more from Parker Garlitz about cover crops. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, here with Parker Garlitz from TrueLeafMarket.com, and we are talking cover crops. I cannot wait to get started with mine, and I'm just learning so much about the what, where, when, why, and how, and what else do you have for us?
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the till versus no-till method, and let me just give you some pros and cons. And again, we don't really advocate one approach or another. It's a stylistic question. It's up to you. But here's kind of some pros and cons, right? If you're gonna till your cover crops under, the pros of that are it's going to terminate the crop, right? And in some cases, if a like a winter rye or something like that doesn't terminate, you don't want to use an herbicide, then it gets a little bit challenging because mowing the crop down isn't going to kill it either, right? It'll spring back. So terminating the crop is a pro of tilling. You till it under and it's going to be terminated. And it will add more biomass to the soil. But some of the negatives of tilling, it does take a little bit more work. It is going to disrupt the soil structure a little bit. The root system that has created that structure and those channels for future roots to grow down, those are gone.
Yeah.
And it doesn't provide a ground cover like a no-till mulch method would. So in terms of insulation and holding moisture and things like that, you lose that, but it's certainly an option. And I've done both. And then in terms of no-till, the pros are there's a ground cover to mulch for erosion and insulation and moisture. It is a little bit less work. It doesn't disrupt the soil structure. The negatives are there's a little bit less biomass because you've got half the biomass above the ground. And there is a little bit easier potential for regrowth on the perennials. So that can be a challenge.
Yeah.
But again, you want to either way, you want to make sure your crop is terminated probably about 3 weeks before you plant your traditional garden. Whether it terminates over winter or if you do it in the spring, you're terminating that 3 weeks before you're planning on planting. Okay, let's talk about different types of cover crops.
Yeah.
And what they look like. What are the different varieties that go into a cover crop? And again, for a home gardener, I'll recommend not to necessarily overthink this. It's good to understand what's in it and what it's doing. But for me, I just use our all-purpose garden cover crop mix that has all of this stuff in it and provides all of the benefits of cover crops. But again, and we sell them all individually for those who know I've got a soil structure problem, or I've got a biomass problem, or I've got a nematode problem, or whatever it is, right? So typically, you've got 4 major categories of seeds that are going to go that typically are used as cover crops. So one is you've got legumes. And this includes clover, pea, vetches, lentils, alfalfa. Those are all legumes. The primary benefit of legumes is nitrogen fixing, right? So these legumes work in conjunction with bacteria in the soil. And our garden cover crop mix is pre-inoculated with the bacteria that works in conjunction with these crops to pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere and deposits that nitrogen into little nodules in the root system. So when you terminate the crop, you've got the nitrogen part of NPK very plentiful in that soil. And nitrogen is a hugely important nutrient. So legumes are primarily nitrogen fixers more than anything else. Brassicas, mostly mustards, are going to be more than anything pest control and deep tap roots. So the tap roots will break up the soil, and mustard roots can go down several feet, and they will tend to pull up micronutrients from very, very far down and pull that up into the top layer of topsoil for availability for garden plants. And we have some mustards that are specifically designed with, I'm forgetting the technical term. I think it's glucosaphates.
Okay.
Anyway, they have a chemical in it that when the cell ruptures, it lets loose a chemical that most garden pests are not keen on, and it will keep garden pests at bay in a natural way. Right?
Interesting.
So that's what typically the brassicas like mustards will do. Radish, technically not a brassica, but it's sort of similar in that terms. It's got the same chemical. And daikon radish is typically what comes in our garden cover crop mix. And the daikon has a big long tap root, and that really will break up soil about as good as anything else that you've got if you've got a hard or a compacted soil. Grains are typically primarily used for erosion control and biomass. All of these create biomass, right? But things like wheat, triticale, and winter rye, I don't know if you've ever grown like wheatgrass in a tray, right?
Yeah.
But if you've ever done that, right, you typically have a layer of soil, then you plant your wheatgrass, and you've got, wheatgrass that's 3 or 4 inches, 5 inches tall. And if you've ever grabbed that wheatgrass and pulled up and looked at the tray, you can no longer see the dirt because the root structure is so massive that it's knitted the dirt together, and all you can see is roots.
Yeah.
Right? So the root structure that's under the ground is much more massive than most people would give it credit for. And that biomass in the roots is creating erosion control, and it's also adding a biomass. So grains are typically used for that. Winter rye tends to be the most popular of the grains for cover crop.
Okay.
And then garden cover crop mix is all of the above, right? And again, if you're a home gardener, I wouldn't overthink it. Just do that, and you'll get a broad spectrum of benefits, if that kind of makes sense.
Absolutely.
Here's the stuff that's included in our garden cover crop mix. I won't bore you with the percentages, but our garden cover crop mix has Austrian field pea, has winter wheat and triticale. It has collards, which are good for forage. It has hairy vetch. It has daikon radish, crimson clover, berseem clover, and yellow mustard. So
it sounds gorgeous.
Oh, it's a cool looking crop.
Yeah.
It's a nice mix of, regular plants and grasses and all kinds of stuff. And the hairy vetch has a beautiful purple flower. So it looks nice too, right?
I love it.
And then, of course, the berseem clover and the crimson clover will have purple and white. Flowers is a strong word, but
yeah,
right.
Yep.
That's kind of the deal there. Our garden cover crop mix comes pre-inoculated with the right bacteria for nitrogen fixation. However, we also sell that inoculation powder separately on our website that you can inoculate any legume crop with. And we've got a little free PDF on our website all about cover crops. It'll walk you through step by step the process for inoculating and doing that kind of stuff. But it's really not a terribly complicated process. And that's really it. That's the high level view of cover crops. Like most topics, you could dig in a whole lot.
Yeah.
But like a lot of topics, you don't need to know how it works.
Yeah. Exactly. That it does work. I've got so many questions. Okay, question number 1. Would you recommend doing this in raised beds?
Absolutely. My home garden, I've got a couple of areas like where I grow my pumpkins that aren't in a raised bed because the spread is massive, right?
Yeah.
But other than those kind of pumpkin and squash crops, I have raised beds and absolutely do them in my raised beds. And here's the kicker. If you do container gardens, right? We've got one of our employees grows on his back porch in buckets and plants cover crops in his containers.
No way. I love it. I love it. This, and in a container, it'd be so easy to just, mulch that down.
Piece
so
of cake.
Easy.
And I don't care how many containers you've got, you're probably looking at 50 cents to $1 worth of seed.
Yeah. Oh, right. It's genius. I love it. Okay. So next question is any of the things that you mentioned edible?
The daikon radish certainly is.
Yeah.
Collards certainly are.
Yeah.
If you're doing those as a mix, might be a little tricky to make sure you got the right ones, but the daikon and collards are. And there's other things that people grow as cover crops too that could potentially be edible, but probably the daikon more than anything.
Yeah. Okay. So when you plant the seed, how often do you suggest watering it until it gets going?
Yeah, you want to keep it nice and damp until it takes hold.
Yeah.
And then water it periodically. And again, it depends on the weather. We've had a ruthlessly, exceptionally dry year.
Yes.
That being said, these cover crops are typically hardier than a lot of other crops, right? For practical intents and purposes, they will behave like weeds and manage to get water when you're wondering everything around it is dead, but the weed is still there thriving. So
exactly.
They're a little bit tougher than most other things you'll grow, but give them plenty of water. And like most things, the more water you give them, the faster they'll grow, the more biomass you create.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, if there's areas that you just kind of want to fill in for now, like in my case, I won't be landscaping for a certain period of time. So until that happens, let's say I plant this cover crop, which I'm going to do. Is it okay to just let it keep growing into the spring?
Yes, with one exception, right?
Okay.
Depending on what you're going to do with that land and how long it's going to go, you definitely always, if it's something that's going to be used for gardening, you probably want to terminate that crop before it bolts and goes to seed. Otherwise, you're going to get a never-ending volunteer problem, right?
Yes.
Which is going to require an anti-germinate to solve that, which some people are keen on, others aren't.
Right.
So just terminate the crop before it goes to seed and you're fine. And then, of course, you can just replant. Yes,
that's what I was thinking. It sounds like to be the most beneficial for the soil, which is my goal, is to, I'm a no-till personally, so I'll mulch that all down and then start over with more, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm so excited. I can't wait to get started. And we have a coupon code we want to tell our listeners about. You can go to trueleafmarket.com and you can use this coupon code JFCoverCrop10. And I will add this to the episode notes, and that'll give you 10% off, did you say?
It is 10% off any of our cover crop products. You bet. Fantastic. So yeah, you're gonna save 80 cents on your $8 bag of cover crop seed. They're very cheap anyway. That's one of the beauty of cover crops.
And for the $8 packet, how much? I mean, you did say
that's usually a pound of seed. Let me pull that up.
Yeah, I'm curious how much space that covers.
Yeah, with some specificity.
Yeah.
So in our garden cover crop mix. Oh, I overstated the $8 price. It's $6.85 for a pound of cover crop seed. Right?
Oh my gosh.
And that's the whole mix. And a pound of cover crop seed will do about 500 square feet.
Okay.
Right. So for my raised bed garden, a pound is more than I need. And, the seeding rate, there's no precision in the seeding rate. If you overseed it, you're going to be fine. If you underseed it a little bit, you're going to be fine. For me, I grow a lot of microgreens, and people usually freak out at how heavily I seed my microgreen crops, but they always look awesome.
Yeah.
And crops are kind of the same thing. You can overseed it a little bit. It's totally fine. And given the choice between under and over, I typically go over.
Gotcha. Well, Parker, it has been so much fun having you on the show. Thank you for getting us all in the know of cover crops. Everybody, get your cover crop seed at trueleafmarket.com. Thanks again for being here, Parker.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.